If you need a dairy-free, egg-free, or vegetarian recipe to bring to Thanksgiving this year, this vegan Thanksgiving menu is here to help. You can make just one of these options or all of them for a plant-based holiday meal. The first recipe we're going to make is this vegan meatloaf. Start by preheating your oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. Then go ahead and chop half of a large yellow onion, or about 1 cup if you want to measure it diced. Next, peel and chop 1 large carrot, followed by 1 large celery rib. Add a drizzle of olive oil to a skillet over medium-high heat, and add the chopped onion, carrot, and celery. Let these cook for about 8 minutes, or until they start to soften. Make sure you stir them occasionally so they don't stick to the pan. While you wait on those, go ahead and mince 2 garlic cloves. You can also open a 15-ounce can of cooked lentils. I'm using the canned version for convenience today, but I also have a tutorial over on my website if you would rather cook these from scratch. You'll need roughly 1.5 cups of cooked lentils for this recipe. Once the veggies start to soften, add in the minced garlic and stir for 1 more minute, just until it's fragrant. Then remove the pan from the heat and set it aside to cool for a moment. For our next step, you'll need a 12-cup food processor fitted with an S-blade. Add a ½ cup of unsalted walnuts into the bowl. Then secure the lid and pulse these briefly, just until they have a crumbly texture. Now, go ahead and add in those slightly cooled veggies, the drained lentils, 1 cup of quick-cooking oats, 2 tablespoons of ground flax seeds, which will help bind this loaf together, 1 teaspoon of dried thyme, 2 tablespoons of tamari, which is a gluten-free soy sauce, and a ½ teaspoon each of fine sea salt and ground black pepper. I'm also going to add in a tablespoon of olive oil to this to make this loaf a little easier to slice later, but you can leave this out if you prefer. Secure the lid on your food processor and pulse about 6 to 8 times, just until the mixture starts to look crumbly and easily sticks together when you press it between your fingers. You don't want to overblend this, or the center of your vegan meatloaf may become mushy. Now, prepare a 9 by 5-inch loaf pan by lightly spraying it with oil. Press a piece of parchment paper into the bottom of the pan to make this loaf easy to remove later. The oil you sprayed will hold the parchment paper in place so it won't wiggle around as you work. Transfer the veggie meatloaf mixture to the pan. Then use a spatula to press it down firmly. Place this in the preheated oven to bake at 375 degrees for 20 minutes. While you wait on that, prepare a quick glaze to go on top. Start by adding 2 tablespoons of tomato paste to a small bowl. Then add in 1 tablespoon of balsamic vinegar, 2 tablespoons of pure maple syrup, a 1/4 teaspoon of fine sea salt, and a 1/4 teaspoon of smoked paprika. The paprika makes this glaze taste a little bit like barbecue sauce, which I love, but if you don't have this in your kitchen, you can skip it. When the timer goes off, carefully remove the veggie meatloaf and add the glaze on top. Once you've smoothed it out with a spoon, you can return the pan to the oven to bake for 10 more minutes. When it's done, let it cool in the pan for at least 15 minutes. This will help it firm up and make it easier to slice. This loaf isn't super tall, but it's loaded with flavor, and you should get about 8 hearty slices from it. The flavor pairs perfectly with your favorite holiday side dishes. You can store any leftovers in an airtight container in the fridge for up to 5 days. The next dish we're going to make are these dairy-free mashed potatoes. To get started, we're going to tackle the worst part of making fresh mashed potatoes, which is peeling them. I'm using 5 pounds of russet potatoes today, but you can also use Yukon Gold potatoes if you prefer. I've found that my hand cramps a little less when working with large potatoes versus peeling very small ones. So pick whichever potatoes are the largest when you go to the store. The main difference between gold potatoes and russet potatoes is that the gold potatoes won't require as much liquid for mashing. So just keep that in mind if you go with that variety. 5 pounds of potatoes will serve about 10 people, so feel free to adjust this recipe as needed. To speed this process along, I'm going to go ahead and fill this 5-quart pot about halfway full with water. Set this on the stove over high heat so it can start warming up while you cut the potatoes. This way you won't have to wait quite as long for your potatoes to start boiling. Getting back to those peeled potatoes, cut them into roughly 1-inch chunks. It doesn't matter if they are exactly this size, as long as you cut the pieces into relatively similar shapes so that they cook evenly. Once you've cut all of the potatoes, add them to the pot of water on the stove. As you can see, a 5-quart pot is the smallest pot you can use for 5 pounds of potatoes. So you may want to use a larger one if you have it. If the water doesn't cover the potatoes, add a little more on top. Once the liquid starts boiling, set a timer for 20 minutes. You'll know the potatoes are perfectly tender when they easily slip off a fork when you poke them. To drain the potatoes, I like to cover the pot with a lid, but leave a little gap where the water can drain. Using oven mitts, hold on to the lid and pot tightly, and tip the pot to drain away the water. For garlic mashed potatoes, add about 2 tablespoons of olive oil to a separate skillet. Grate 3 to 5 cloves of garlic into the olive oil, depending on how much garlic flavor you want to add. Heat this up over medium-high heat and stir it for about 2 minutes until the garlic smells fragrant. If your garlic starts to stick to the bottom of your pan, add a tablespoon of water and stir again. Once that smells good, transfer the garlic and olive oil to the pot of potatoes. Season with 2 teaspoons of fine sea salt and a half teaspoon of ground black pepper. Then it's time to start mashing. At this point, you can start adding some warm dairy-free milk to help loosen the texture. I'm starting with 3/4 of a cup of almond milk. But if you're using Yukon Gold potatoes, you may want to start with less than that, because you can always add more as you go. Season with extra salt or pepper if you like, and then these vegan mashed potatoes are ready to serve warm with any extra toppings you love. This is the perfect side dish to make ahead of time for your holiday meal, so feel free to make these up to 48 hours in advance. Store them in an airtight container in your fridge, and when you're ready to reheat them, you may have to add an extra splash of water to help loosen up the texture again. The next dairy-free side dish we're going to make today is some vegan gravy to go along with those mashed potatoes. You can cook this on a separate burner on your stove while your potatoes are cooking if you want to multitask. To make this recipe, you can chop the other half of that large yellow onion left over from making the vegan meatloaf. This is about 1 cup diced. Next, slice about 4 ounces of cremini or baby bella mushrooms. This is also about 1 cup if you want to measure that way. You'll also need to mince 2 garlic cloves. Next, you'll need 1 medium Yukon Gold potato, which should weigh between 4 to 6 ounces. Cut that into 1-inch chunks, but there's no need to peel it, which makes the prep a little easier. Now drizzle some olive oil in a deep pan that you have a lid for, over medium-high heat. Add the chopped onion and cook that for about 5 minutes. Stir it occasionally just until it starts to soften. Now add in the minced garlic and mushrooms. Stir that for a minute or so, and once the garlic smells fragrant, add in those potato chunks, along with 2 tablespoons of tamari, which is a gluten-free soy sauce, and 1 cup of water. Bring the water to a boil over high heat, and once that's boiling, cover the pan with a lid and lower the heat to a gentle simmer. Cook this until the potatoes are easily pierced with a fork, which should take about 10 minutes. Now that the veggies are tender, carefully transfer everything in the pan, including the liquid, to a high-speed blender. Then secure the lid. And since we're about to blend a hot liquid, make sure you remove the vent in your blender's lid and cover it with a thin dish towel so you won't get splattered by hot liquid as it blends. This little safety step will make sure that the steam pressure doesn't cause your blender's lid to pop off while you're blending something hot. Once the mixture looks silky smooth, go ahead and taste it and adjust any seasoning as you see fit. As you can see, the potato thickens this gravy perfectly without using any butter or flour. So this gravy is not only dairy-free, but it's also gluten-free. Once you taste it, I think it will become your new favorite holiday gravy. The flavor is amazing, even if you're not a mushroom fan. This is another dish that you can prepare ahead of time, so feel free to make it a few days in advance and store it in your fridge. When you're ready to reheat it on the stove, you may need to add an extra splash of water to help thin out the consistency again. The next vegan Thanksgiving recipe we're going to make today is my dairy-free green bean casserole. Instead of using canned soup, this recipe is made with a creamy white bean sauce that you can assemble in no time. To get started, preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. You'll need to chop 1 yellow onion for this recipe. If you're using fresh green beans, you'll also need to trim those into 1-inch pieces. Today, I'm taking a shortcut as I tend to do for big holiday meals, and I'm using a 1-pound bag of frozen green beans instead. These are already cut into small pieces, so that cuts out a lot of prep work for this dish. Now add a drizzle of olive oil to a skillet over medium-high heat, and saute the onion until it starts to soften, which should take about 5 minutes. Then add in the fresh or frozen green beans and a half teaspoon of fine sea salt. Now cover the pan and let the veggies cook until they are tender. This should take about 8 to 10 minutes. While you wait on that, add 3/4 of a cup of walnuts and a 1/4 teaspoon each of garlic powder and salt to a high-speed blender. Blend this briefly, just until the walnuts are crumbly. This is going to be an easy gluten-free topping, so set this aside in a separate bowl. And if you would rather use traditional fried onions on top, you can certainly do that instead and skip this step. Next, open a 15-ounce can of white beans. I'm using Great Northern beans today, but cannellini or navy beans would also work. Drain and rinse those well. Then add them to that high-speed blender that you just used. Next, add in a half cup of water, 1 clove of garlic, 1 teaspoon of salt, the leaves from 1 sprig of fresh rosemary, a 1/4 teaspoon of ground black pepper, and a teaspoon of fresh lemon juice. Secure the lid on the blender and blend until smooth. If the sauce is looking too thick, which can vary based on the beans that you use, you can add up to a 1/4 cup more water and blend again. Then set that aside until you're ready to use it. Now remove the lid from the pan on the stove and test a green bean with your fork to make sure it's as tender as you want it to be. You can always cook these for another minute or 2 if you need to. Once they feel tender, pour the white bean sauce into the pan and stir well. If you're not already using an oven-safe dish, transfer the mixture to a pan that can go in the oven. Then sprinkle the reserved walnut crumble over the top. Bake this at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 30 minutes, or until the topping looks lightly golden. Let it cool for 10 to 15 minutes and then it's ready to serve. This easy dish has the creamy texture and flavor you love without using any dairy or cheese, so it's perfect for those who need an alternative to the classic version. The next dish we're going to make for our vegan Thanksgiving is vegan mac and cheese. You can blend together the creamy cheese sauce while your pasta cooks, so this is just as fast as making a box of mac and cheese. To get started, bring a large pot of water to a boil over high heat. This recipe is easy to make gluten-free simply by using your favorite gluten-free pasta. Just keep in mind that gluten-free pasta is often sold in smaller boxes. So be sure to read the label because this recipe calls for 16 ounces of elbow noodles. Once the water is boiling, I like to add a tablespoon of salt so the noodles will develop some flavor as they cook. But this is optional if you're watching your sodium levels. Once the pasta is cooking, you can start adding the cheese sauce ingredients to a high-speed blender. You'll need 1.5 cups of cashews for this recipe, and I'm using cashews that are not roasted or salted, so they have a mild flavor. Next, add in 3/4 of a cup of water and 2 tablespoons of fresh lemon juice. Next, add a 1/4 cup of nutritional yeast, which helps to add a cheesy flavor. I also like to add in some spices like a half teaspoon of chili powder, a 1/4 teaspoon of garlic powder, a 1/4 teaspoon of turmeric, which is just for color, and a pinch of cayenne pepper. Next, add in a half teaspoon of Dijon or spicy brown mustard, and 1 teaspoon of fine sea salt. If you're using white table salt, you may want to use even less than that because it does taste different. Secure the lid on your blender and blend the cheese sauce until it's smooth. Stop and scrape down the sides to make sure everything is mixed well. And if you see any cashew pieces, add 2 more tablespoons of water and blend again. You want the sauce to be silky smooth. Once the pasta is tender, go ahead and drain that and return it to the pot. Pour the cheese sauce over the top and stir well so the noodles get coated in the cheesy sauce. Give this a taste, and then you can add anything you think it might need. This tastes delicious to me, but if you need to add a little extra salt or a squeeze of lemon juice, you can do that now. I think this recipe tastes best when you make it fresh, so I don't recommend mixing this together ahead of time. But if you want to make the pasta a day before and store it in the fridge, you could do that and then make the cheese sauce before serving. The sauce will thicken as it cools, but you can always add an extra splash of water to help make it creamy again. Now that we've covered the main course and some delicious sides, let's not forget about the dessert. I already have a vegan pecan pie recipe here on my YouTube channel, so today I thought I'd show you how to make my favorite pumpkin pie. It tastes better than the recipe on the back of the pumpkin can, and it's incredibly easy to make. To get started, preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. You'll need an unbaked pie crust for this recipe, and you can use my oat flour pie crust or almond flour pie crust if you need a vegan and gluten-free recipe. Or you can take a shortcut and buy a crust that's already made from the store. Once you have the crust, you can start making the filling. For this recipe, you'll need one 15-ounce can of pumpkin puree and 1 cup of cashews that are not roasted or salted. You could also probably replace this with a half cup of raw cashew butter if you prefer. Add those to a high-speed blender, followed by 3/4 of a cup of pure maple syrup. Next, add 2 teaspoons of pumpkin pie spice and a half teaspoon of fine sea salt. Secure the lid on your blender and blend these 5 ingredients together. Stop and scrape down the sides as needed until it looks silky smooth, with no visible chunks. Be patient and just keep scraping down the sides until you don't see any cashew pieces. Pour the pie filling into your unbaked pie crust and smooth it out evenly. This pie is now ready to bake, but because I'm using a store-bought pie crust in this flimsy pan, I'm going to set it on a larger baking sheet so it's easier to take in and out of the oven. Bake this vegan pumpkin pie at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 hour. But I'm setting a timer for 40 minutes because that's when I want to check on the pie crust. At that point, you may need to cover the crust with a crust shield or foil if you think it's starting to get too brown. Then let it finish cooking for the remaining 20 minutes. This pie will need to cool for 1 hour on the counter. Then you can transfer it to the fridge to chill. Just like traditional pumpkin pie, this vegan version needs to chill in the fridge for at least 4 hours to firm up completely. This is a great dessert to make the night before your big holiday dinner because it's best served chilled from the fridge. Slice it into 8 pieces and add any toppings you like. They sell dairy-free whipped cream at the store if you want another easy shortcut. Or you can make your own at home by using the cream from a can of coconut milk. I hope these 6 recipes will make your life easier if you are planning to host a vegan Thanksgiving dinner. Check out my other videos here for even more gluten-free recipes.